so before going into fertilization, I want to discuss a small topic that is called as menstrual cycle, right? We have said that in female primates, a cyclical changes is happening in the female reproductive system, right? A cyclical changes is happening in the female reproductive system, and we call it as what? We call it as menstrual cycle, right? In mammals, we will call it as estrous cycle, and in primates, right, in monkeys, in humans, we will call it as menstrual cycle, right? When the menstrual cycle will start? It will start at puberty, okay? Menstrual cycle will start at puberty, right? And which marks the beginning, right? Which marks the beginning of menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle will start with a period of vaginal bleeding, okay? So the first vaginal bleeding is called as what? It is called as a menstruation, right? So the first menstruation will denote what? It will denote the start of the menstrual cycle or at the attainment of puberty, and that is called as what? It is called as menarche, okay? So the first menstruation, right, it will denote the starting of puberty, right? That is called as what? It is called as menarche, okay? It is called as menarche, right? And what is this menstrual cycle? I told you the menstrual cycle is a cyclical event, right? So how long will it extend, right? So the menstrual cycle will extend up to 28 to 29 days. The duration is what? Duration is 28 to 29 days. What does this mean? Duration is 28 to 29 days. That means after 28 to 29 days, the events will get repeated, right? It's a cyclical process, right? So there will be a series of events for the 28 to 29 days. Then after 28 to 29 days, these events will get repeated, right? That is called as menstrual cycle, right? That events are called as the menstrual cycle, right? And the events which occurring from one menstruation to the next menstruation is called as menstrual cycle. Understand? So the menstrual cycle is the cyclical changes that is happening in the female reproductive system, right? When it begins at puberty, right? The first menstruation is called as what? It is called as the menarche, whereas vaginal bleeding occurs for the first time. It is called as menarche, right? And duration of menstrual cycle is 28 to 29 days, right? After 28 to 29 days, the cyclical events get repeated, right? So the events which occurring from one menstrual period to the next menstrual period, okay? That means the events which occurring from one bleeding to the next bleeding time, okay? That events are called as what? That events are called as the menstrual cycle, right? Okay. So according to the changes present or changes occurring in the uterus and ovary, we will divide the menstrual cycle into ovarian cycle and uterine cycle. Okay, we will divide it into ovarian cycle, right? What is meant by ovarian cycle? These are the cyclical changes that is occurring in the ovary, right? Ovarian cycle. And what are the changes that occurring in the uterus? Okay, that is called as what? That is called as uterine cycle. Okay, uterine cycle. Okay, so the changes that is occurring in ovary is called as ovarian cycle, and the changes that occurs in uterus is called as uterine cycle. Okay, so the duration of menstrual cycle is 28 to 29 days, right? That is around 1 month. Okay, and it is between the one menstruation till the next menstruation, right? The events which occurring from one menstruation to the next menstruation is called as menstrual cycle, right? And since if the cyclical changes that occurring in ovary will call it as ovarian cycle, and cyclical changes which occur in uterus will call it as uterine cycle. Understand about the menstrual cycle? Okay, now we'll see what are the changes that occurring in ovary as well as uterus. Okay. So I told you what? There is a bleeding, the vaginal bleeding occurs, right? What causes the vaginal bleeding? The vaginal bleeding, okay, this is the uterus part, okay, and this is the ovary part, and this is the hormonal, ovarian hormone. Ovarian hormone, okay, and we have the pituitary hormone. Okay, you have to consider this much things. Okay, so I told you what is happening in menstrual period. The endometrium, okay, the endometrium will shed off. Okay, consider this the uterus. The endometrium will shed off in the form of bleed. Okay, so what happens? The thickness of the endometrium will reduce. Okay, this much thickness is there, half of it gets shed off and bleeds outside. Okay, so the thickness of endometrium get reduced. Okay, thickness of endometrium get reduced. This has happened during menstruation. Okay, this is what had happened in menstruation. And how long will it take? The menstruation phase will extend from 3 days to 7 days. Okay, this is 3 to 7 days. Okay, the menstruation phase will extend from 3 to 7 days. Okay, so after the menstruation, what happened is that the GnRH, the hypothalamus, okay, the hypothalamus, that means towards the end of the menstruation phase, that means towards 7th day or around 7th day, what happens? The hypothalamus will secrete what hormone? Will secrete hormone called GnRH, which is this gonadotropin releasing hormone, right? This will stimulate what? The gonadotropin releasing hormone will stimulate the anterior pituitary. Right, it will stimulate the anterior pituitary, and what this will secrete? This will secrete LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH. Okay, it will stimulate the GnRH will stimulate the anterior pituitary and secrete what? And secrete LH and FSH. Okay, this LH and FSH. Okay, this LH and FSH going to act where? This will act at our ovary. The LH and FSH will act at our ovary so that the primary follicle, okay, the primary follicle will starts to develop. Okay, the primary follicle will starts to develop to form secondary follicle, which will forms the tertiary follicle, right? And when the follicles starts to develop, what will the follicles will secrete? The follicle has granulosa cells and theca cells, right? The follicle will starts to secrete what? Will starts to secrete hormone, ovarian hormone. What is that? Estrogen. Okay, it will secrete estrogen. So there will be increase in estrogen. Okay, estrogen increases, right? There will be LH increase, FSH increase. Okay, LH increase, FSH increase, right? So, and this phase, what will this estrogen will do? This estrogen will, okay, I told you that LH and FSH will act where? It will act at the ovary. And where the estrogen will act? It will act at the uterus. Okay, estrogen will act at the uterus. And what it will do? It will increase the thickness of the endometrium. It will promote the growth of the myometrium. So the uterine wall will, the thickness of the uterine wall will starts increasing. Okay, the thickness of the uterine wall starts increasing. Okay, I told you this much of the uterine wall shed off during the phase of menstruation, right? That will start increasing. The thickness of the uterine wall will start increasing. Okay, because of the action of the estrogen, right? So this phase is called as what? This phase in uterus it is called as proliferative phase. Okay, so in uterus it is called as what? This is called as proliferative phase, right? In uterus it is called as proliferative phase, and in ovary it is called as what? This is called as follicular phase. Okay, in ovary it is called as follicular phase because it marks the development of follicle, so it is called as follicular phase. Okay, follicular phase. And how much duration? I told you it is 3 to 7 days, right? This is 3 to 7 days. So what will be the proliferative phase? It will be 7 to 14 days. Okay, proliferative phase will be around 7 to 14 days. Understand? Proliferative phase will be around 7 to 14 days. So proliferative phase will correspond to which phase? It will correspond to the follicular phase. So the follicular phase will be also around 7 to 14 days. Okay. Okay. So once the follicle will forms what? It will forms the Graafian follicle, right? Graafian follicles, right? I told you it will initially it's primary follicle, it will form secondary follicle, tertiary follicle and develop into Graafian follicle, right? That is at the middle of the cycle, 28 to 29 day cycle. It is during the middle of the cycle. What happens to the hormone? There will be a sudden increase, okay? Sudden increase in the level of the LH and FSH. There will be sudden increase in the level of LH and FSH. Okay, this increase in LH we will call it as LH surge. LH surge. Why? Because it happens exactly 24 hours before ovulation. Okay, this happens exactly 24 hours before ovulation. Okay, the LH surge will occur 1 day before ovulation. Okay, it occurs 1 day before ovulation. So what will this do? The increased LH, okay, the increased LH will act upon the granulosa cells and it causes the rupture of the granulosa cell. Okay, this LH will causes the rupture of the granulosa cell and the ovum is released. The ovum is released, right? This is called as what? This is called as the ovulatory phase. Ovulatory phase, okay, which occurs around the middle of the cycle, right? So in the middle of the cycle, what happens? There will be a sudden increase in the peak, right? The LH and FSH will reaches their peak, okay? LH and FSH will be reaches their peak and that is called as LH surge, right? What is sudden increase in the concentration of LH, right? And this will cause, this LH will act on the granulosa cell and causes the rupture of the granulosa cell, releasing the ovum, and that is called as the ovulatory phase. Okay, that is called as the ovulatory phase. Understand? Ovulatory phase, right? So when the granulosa cells or the ruptures, what happens? The estrogen production decreases, right? And the Graafian follicle will get transformed into another structure. I told you what is that? It is the corpus luteum, right? Corpus luteum, right? Corpus luteum. And what this corpus luteum will start to produce now? It will produce progesterone, right? It will produce progesterone, right? This will produce progesterone. And what the progesterone will do? The progesterone will make secretory changes in the endometrium and it will maintain this endometrium. Okay, we have seen that in the proliferative phase, what happens? The endometrium has reaches the maximum height, right? And what the progesterone will now do? It will now cause a secretory changes. What means what? There will be increase in the glands. Okay, the estrogen has increased the thickness, right? Increase the thickness, increase in the myometrium, increase in the endometrial thickness, right? What the progesterone will do? It will increase the glands, it will increase the blood supply to the endometrium, right? It will increase the glandular tissue in the endometrium, it will increase the blood supply, right? Blood supply of the endometrium, right? So the progesterone will cause secretory changes in the endometrium and maintains the endometrium, right? So that phase is called as what? It is called as the secretory phase, right? It is called as secretory phase in uterus. Okay, it is called as secretory phase in uterus. How long the secretory phase will last? It will last for 14 days. Okay, right? Secretory phase will last for 14 days. What is the corresponding phase in ovary? Right? What has happened? The Graafian follicle get ruptured and what forms? Forms the corpus luteum, right? Corpus luteum forms and what it is doing? It is secreting the progesterone. Okay, it is secreting the progesterone. So we will call this phase as what? We will call it as luteal phase. So in ovary we will call it as luteal phase. Okay, ovary we will call it as what? We will call it as luteal phase. Okay. And what happens in luteal phase? The increase in LH and FSH and the progesterone has increased. So what will it do? When there is increase in LH and FSH, okay, the granulosa cells will secrete another hormone. Okay, the granulosa cells of the Graafian follicle will secrete another hormone. What is that hormone? That is called as the inhibin. Okay, inhibin. it will secrete another, the granulosa cells of the ovary will secrete another hormone that is called as the inhibin, which will inhibit the LH and FSH. Okay, the granulosa cells of the ovary will secrete another hormone called as inhibin, right? This will decrease, okay, this will decrease the secretion of LH and FSH. Okay, along with that the progesterone, okay, the progesterone will also inhibit the secretion of LH and FSH, okay, along with the GnRH hormone. So there will be reduction, okay, reduction in level of LH and FSH, okay, LH and FSH decrease, okay, there will be reduction in the level of LH and FSH. Understand? So how LH and FSH decrease? There are two pathways, right? How? First one, the granulosa cells will secrete inhibin, which will in turn inhibit the hypothalamus, thus decrease in GnRH. Also it will inhibit the anterior pituitary, right? Anterior pituitary, and thus in decreasing the LH and FSH, right? That is, we have discussed that term. That is, what is that? That is called as the negative feedback inhibition, right? By negative feedback inhibition, right? Along with inhibin, which is the other hormone which decreases the secretion, that is the progesterone, right? Progesterone, okay. So what happens? The progesterone is secreted, so the endometrium, right? Endometrium become more glandular, or it may come in the secretory phase, and progesterone helps to maintain that endometrium, right? Help to maintain that endometrium, right? So the ovum has released, right? We have two fate for the ovum, right? We have two fate for the ovum. Okay, understand this table clearly. What is happening? Before discussing this fate of ovum, I want everyone to be clear about this table, right? We'll see. This is what? This is the menstrual phase, right? Menstrual phase, what is happening in the menstrual phase? I told you there will be bleeding, right? There will be vaginal bleeding, right? Because of the shedding of endometrium, right? That marks the starting of the menstrual cycle, right? For the bleeding will be there for 3 to 7 days, right? That is called as a menstrual phase, right? Towards the end of the menstrual phase, what happened? The hypothalamus gets stimulated, right? And it starts secreting gonadotropin releasing hormone, which in turn stimulate the pituitary to produce what? Produce the LH and FSH, which will act at the ovary, right? And causes the development of the follicles. Okay, the primary follicles become secondary follicles become tertiary follicles, so on, right? So when the follicle starts developing, what's the follicle will secrete? It will secrete estrogen. Estrogen will then act at the endometrium, right? Endometrium, and starts to increase the thickness of the bleeding stops, right? After 7 days the bleeding stops, right? And now slowly when the estrogen comes and acts at the endometrium, the thickness of the endometrium starts increasing. Why? How? Because the estrogen will increase the endometrial cells as well as it will increase the myometrial cells, okay? So the thickness of the uterine wall will starts increasing, okay? Then that is called as what? In uterus it is called as a proliferative phase, and in ovary, since the development of follicle occurring in that phase, it is called as the follicular phase. Understand? There is follicular phase and proliferative phase. Okay, these two are going simultaneously, right? So what happens? By around the middle of the cycle, there will be a sudden increase in the, or the LH and FSH reaches their peak. Okay, by middle of the cycle, the LH and FSH reaches their peak. Okay, this is called as LH surge. Okay, LH surge. And what happens in LH surge? The increased concentration of the LH hormone will comes and act where? In the Graafian follicle, right? In the Graafian follicle, and this will rupture. Graafian follicle will rupture and releases the ovum. That is called as the ovulatory phase. Okay, so the events which occurs before the ovulatory phase, we will call it as what? It is called as the pre-ovulatory phase, and the events which occur after the ovulatory phase is called as post-ovulatory phase. So which is the pre-ovulatory phase? It is the follicular phase and proliferative phase, which is the post-ovulatory phase, right? After ovulation, the Graafian follicles will become what? It will becomes corpus luteum, right? It will become corpus luteum, and it starts to secrete which hormone? Secrete progesterone, right? Along with progesterone, so what the progesterone will do? The progesterone will go and causes secretory changes in the endometrium, right? There will be increase in the glandular tissue, increase in blood vessels, okay? So it will increase the vascularity of the endometrium, right? And it maintains the thickness of the endometrium, right? It maintains the thickness or it maintains the secretory nature of the endometrium, okay? Okay, so that phase is called as what? It is called as secretory phase in uterus, along with what? Since corpus luteum has formed, it is functioning, it is called as luteal phase in ovary, right? So what happens? This progesterone along with an hormone secreted by the granulosa cells of the ovary, which is that hormone, inhibit this too will inhibit the GnRH as well as the anterior pituitary, right? So there will be decrease in LH and FSH, okay? Decrease in LH and FSH, right? Okay, so now we'll see what happening to our ovum. Now we'll see what happens to the ovum, right? The ovum, right? The ovum has two feet. Which are the feet? It can get fertilized, right? It can get fertilized, or it doesn't get fertilized. No fertilization. If no fertilization occurs, what happens? If there is no fertilization, right? If there is no fertilization after 14 days, I told you secretory phase, right? So after 10 days, not 14 days, okay? If there is no fertilization after 10 days of the formation of the corpus luteum, okay? The corpus luteum will disintegrate. Corpus luteum degenerates, right? Corpus luteum degenerates. What happens when the corpus luteum degenerates? When the corpus luteum degenerates, there is no progesterone, right? No progesterone, right? No progesterone, right? So what happens? Since there is no progesterone, what happens to the endometrium? The endometrium starts to shed. Endometrium starts to shed, okay? Starts to shed, resulting in the menstruation, right? Resulting in the menstruation. And what happened to the corpus luteum? It forms a tiny white scar. It is called as corpus albicans. Understand? If the ovum doesn't get fertilized, what happens? The corpus luteum will degenerate after 10 days. If the corpus luteum will get degenerate, what happens to progesterone? Progesterone starts to decrease. There is no progesterone, so what happens? The endometrium will start shedding, okay? When the endometrium will start shedding, it will comes out through the vagina as menstruation, right? This starts the next cycle, menstruation, right? And the corpus luteum will become a scar tissue called as what? Called as corpus albicans, right? That is occurring in the female reproductive system, right? Female reproductive system. Now we will see some numericals, right? How many follicles, right? How many primary follicles will get stimulated during each cycle? Around 6 to 12, okay? 6 to 12 follicles, okay? 6 to 12 follicles get stimulated around each cycle, out of which only one will become, say, Graafian follicle. Okay, one will become the Graafian follicle, right? Only one will become the Graafian follicle, others will get degenerates. Okay, others will get degenerates. I told you how many primary follicles are there during the time of puberty. We have 60,000 to 80,000 primary follicles, right? These follicles, all of these follicles doesn't get activated, right? It doesn't get activated. Out of this, only 6 to 12 get activated. The others will get degenerates, okay? Okay, this 6 to 12 will get activated at each cycle, okay? 6 to 12 follicles will get activated each cycle, out of which only one will be forming Graafian follicle. So only one ovum will be released from the ovary each month, okay? Only a single ovum, okay? Single ovum will be released from an ovary in each month, okay, or one ovum will get released from either from the left ovary or from the right ovary, okay, not from both ovaries, okay, only single ovum will be released from any one of the ovary, either from the left or from the right, okay, not from the both ovaries, okay. So only single ovum is released during the time of a menstrual cycle, okay. Single menstrual cycle, single ovum is released, understand. So 6 to 12 follicles will be stimulated during each menstrual cycle, out of which only one will form the Graafian follicle, understand, Graafian follicle, right. So and how long will it occur? What is the average age? The females will attain menarche by the age of 12 to 15 years, okay, 12 to 15 years, right. Females will attain menarche by the age of 12 to 15 years, okay. Menarche by 12 to 15 years, right. And does this menstrual cycle will occur throughout the lifetime? No, it doesn't occur like that. It doesn't occur throughout the lifetime. But what happens? The menstrual cycle will stop at around 50 years, okay. Menstrual cycle will stop at 50 years, and that is called as what? It is called as menopause, okay. So the menstrual cycle will stop at 50 years, which is called as the menopause, okay. So the time period between menarche to menopause is termed as the reproductive period in a female, okay. Between the menopause and menarche is termed as the reproductive period in a female, right. So the menarche age starts at around 12 to 15 years and menopause around 50 years. The menstrual cycle will stop. There is no ovum production, there is no ovum release. Ovum production will stop from by the time of birth. I told you no new ovum is formed after birth, right. So the ovum release will stop around 50 years, right. So after the stopping of ovum release, there is no menstrual cycle. No ovum release, no menstrual cycle. So there will be no menstrual cycle. That is called as menopause, okay. Menopause, around the 50 years the females attain menopause, and menarche is around 12 to 15 years, right, where the first menstruation occurs. That is called as menarche. And the last, or at around after 50 years, there is no menstrual cycle. That is called as menopause, understand. Okay, so now we will see the hormones, okay. Now we will see the different hormones in menstrual cycle, okay. First we will see the GnRH, okay. We will see the GnRH, okay. GnRH, which is this GnRH? Which is the gonadotropin releasing hormone, right. Gonadotropin releasing hormone, right. When this increases, or what does the gonadotropin releasing hormone do? It will increase FSH and LH. Increase FSH, increase LH, right. Which phase? It will increase in the follicular phase or the pre-ovulatory phase, right. Follicular phase, okay. Increase of GnRH is seen in follicular phase, right. Now which is the next hormone? We have two anterior pituitary hormone, right. We have FSH, right. We have FSH, we have LH, right. FSH, first we will see the FSH, right. When there will be increase in FSH? Increase in FSH is seen in the follicular phase, okay. Similar to the GnRH follicular phase, there will be increase in FSH, right. And the peak will occur just prior to ovulation, right. Peak will occur just prior to ovulation. It is a function of FSH. It will helps in follicular development, right. Follicular development, and also this will promote oogenesis, okay. FSH will promote oogenesis, right. I told you the ovum, right. The ovum is present at puberty. The ovum is present at which stage? It is present at the prophase 1 arrest, okay. It is arrested at the prophase 1, right, primary oocyte, right. It has to develop to the secondary oocyte, right. The FSH is the hormone which promote the oogenesis, or it will promote the formation of secondary oocyte, right. Secondary oocyte by FSH, okay. And between increase of FSH is in which phase? In the follicular phase, and the peak will occur before just prior to the ovulation, right. LH, right. What will LH do? LH also helps in follicular development. It also helps in follicular development. Then it causes the rupture of Graafian follicles, okay. it causes the rupture of Graafian follicle, right, and releases the ovum. Okay, LH. By which phenomena? By a phenomena called as LH surge. Okay, LH surge, right? We have seen. What is happening in LH surge? There will be maximum concentration of the LH. When? Prior to ovulation, right? Around 24 to 36 hours prior to ovulation, the LH will reaches its maximum peak concentration or maximum concentration, that is called as LH surge, which will in turn causes the rupture of Graafian follicle, thus causing ovulation, right? Causing, that is called as LH surge, which occurs 24 to 36 hours prior to ovulation. Understand? Occurs 24 to 36 hours prior to ovulation, right? Which is the next hormone? We have the estrogen, right? Estrogen, right? When will the estrogen will increase? Estrogen will increase in the proliferative phase, right? Proliferative phase, right? These three will act at the ovarian level. Okay, estrogen will act at uterine level, okay, in the uterus, right? So it will causes proliferative changes in the uterus. Okay, proliferative changes in the uterus. What are the proliferative changes? It will increase the endometrial thickness. Okay, endometrial thickness by increase in the by multiplication of cells. Okay, by endometrial hyperplasia. Okay, by multiplication of the endometrial cells, it will increase the endometrial thickness, right? It will increase the myometrial thickness also, right? Smooth muscles of the, what is myometrium? It is the smooth muscle of the uterus. Okay, so the estrogen will increase the uterine wall thickness. Okay, it will increase the uterine wall thickness, right? And when will be the high concentration of estrogen seen? It is seen in the proliferative phase, right, where after the menstrual flow, the endometrium has shed off and it will get proliferated under the influence of estrogen, right? Then progesterone. Where the progesterone is secreted? It is secreted from the structure called as corpus luteum, right? Corpus luteum, right? So when the corpus luteum will be formed, it will formed after ovulation. So the progesterone will be seen in the luteal phase or the secretory phase. Okay, it will seen in the luteal phase or the secretory phase, right? Luteal phase or the secretory phase. And what is the function of progesterone? It will maintain the endometrium for pregnancy. Okay, it will maintain the endometrium. Okay, it will maintain the progesterone will maintain the endometrium. Okay, it will maintain the endometrium. It also decrease the myometrial contractions. Myometrial contraction. It will decrease the myometrial contraction. Okay, progesterone will also decrease the myometrial contraction. Okay, it will maintain the endometrium for pregnancy, or it will decrease the myometrial contraction, right? We have one more hormone, that is inhibin, right? Inhibin. Okay, from where the inhibin is secreted? It is from the granulosa cells, right? Granulosa cells of the follicle. And what the function of inhibin? It will decrease FSH, right? Feedback inhibition, right? It will give feedback inhibition to decrease the FSH. If there is enough oogenesis has occurred, the inhibin is secreted from the follicular granulosa cells of the follicle, which will in turn inhibit the hypothalamus as well as the anterior pituitary, thus decreasing the level of FSH. Okay, decreasing the level of FSH. These are the 6 hormones. Very, very important table. Understand? Okay. Okay, now we'll see some numericals. Okay, I told you at the time of puberty we had around 60,000 to 80,000 primary follicles, right? 50,000 to 80,000 primary follicles is present in puberty, right? So in reproductive age group, how many ovums will be produced? 400 to 450 ovums will be produced. Okay, ovum is produced by a female during her reproductive age group. So what is the reproductive age group? That is when menarche, right? From menarche to menopause, that is the reproductive age group. Menarche at 12 to 15 years, right? Menopause at around 50 years. Okay, in between this time period, okay, 15 to 50 years is the reproductive age group between the menopause and menarche. Then we will see something about the menstrual cycle, right? Menstrual cycle. It is a 28 to 29 day cycle, out of which menstruation for 3 to 5 days. Okay, menstruation for 3 to 5 days, right? Then we have the follicular phase. Follicular phase, how long? It is 7 to 21 days. Follicular phase can extend between 7 to 21 days. Then we have the ovulation. Ovulation around 14th day or mid-cycle. Okay, around 14th day or mid-cycle, right? Then we have the secretory or luteal phase, right? Luteal or secretory phase, how long? It is for around 14 days. Okay, this is regarding the menstrual cycle. Okay, 14 days. This is regarding the ovum and menarche and menopause. Understand? Okay. Then we have discussed the fate of ovum, right? We have discussed the fate of ovum, right? It can take two pathways, right? It can get fertilized, right? Or there is no fertilization. If fertilized, what will it lead to? If the ovum get fertilized, it will lead to what? It will lead to pregnancy, right? So if there is pregnancy, does the menstrual flow occurs or the menstruation occurs? No. No menstruation, right? Because the ovum has taken this path, right? The ovum has taken this path, right? If there is no fertilization, then menstruation will occur. But if there is fertilization, it will lead to pregnancy. There will be no menstruation, right? So can we say that the absence of menstruation is a sign of pregnancy? Yes, right. Absence of menstruation can be a sign of pregnancy, right? But is it exclusively, that means if there is no menstruation, it can only be pregnancy or can be some other causes? It can also be some other reasons, right? That means no menstruation or the absence of menstruation can be caused due to pregnancy or other reasons. What are other reasons for absence of menstruation? Poor health of the female, right? Poor health. Increased stress, right? Or diseases of the ovary, uterus. Okay, this can lead to, or fallopian tube can lead to what? It can lead to absence of menstruation, right? Diseases of reproductive system, reproductive tract can lead to absence of menstruation, right? So the absence of menstruation doesn't always indicate pregnancy. There can other reasons also present for the absence of menstruation, right? But what does the cyclical menstruation means? The cyclical menstruation means that the female is reproductively healthy. Okay, she have healthy reproductive system. Okay, she is reproductively healthy or has a healthy reproductive system. Okay, the cyclical menstruation indicate that the female is reproductively healthy. Okay, I told you when is the reproductive age group? It is between the menarche to menopause, right? 15 to 50 years. Okay. Right, this is regarding the fate, right? So what we have seen in the menstrual cycle, we have seen the two phases. We have seen the uterine phase, we have seen the ovarian phase, right? We have seen the uterine phase, we have seen the ovarian phase, right? In ovarian phases, we have seen the follicular development, we have seen the ovulation, we have seen the luteal phase, right? In uterine phase, we have seen the proliferative phase and we have seen the secretory phase, right? Secretory phase. Then we have seen how these are regulated, right? How the menstrual cycle is regulated. It is regulated by the control of hormones, right? We have seen how GnRH will increase FSH and LH, which will in turn increase estrogen and progesterone, right? And we have seen a positive mechanism, right? When the positive mechanism occurs, that is when the increase in estrogen will cause what? It will cause a LH surge or increase in FSH around the time of ovulation. Okay, that is feed positive mechanism. Then we have seen the feedback inhibition, right? Where we have seen the feedback inhibition, when there is sufficient oogenesis, right? Sufficient oogenesis, the anterior pituitary or GnRH will be or hypothalamus and anterior pituitary are inhibited, right? Thus the hormone level will decreases after ovulation, right? Similarly, the granulosa cells will secrete what? It will secrete a hormone called as inhibin, which will in turn inhibit the FSH secretion, that is feedback inhibition, right? Feedback inhibition. Then we have seen the various hormonal changes, right? Which hormone increases in which phase, right? Or the hormonal changes in each phases we have seen, right? We have seen the duration of menstrual cycle, right? Each phase of the menstrual cycle, right? And we have seen absence of menstruation can be due to various causes. Okay, this is about the menstrual cycle.
Ovulation and the menstrual cycle. The processes of ovulation and menstruation occur because of the interplay between the pituitary gland, the ovaries, and the uterus. At the start of a typical 28-day menstrual cycle, the hypothalamus secretes gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or GnRH, into the network of blood vessels which surround the pituitary gland. This stimulates the cells of the pituitary gland to secrete follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, which travels through the bloodstream to reach the ovaries, where it stimulates the development of ovarian follicles. Each of the developing follicles consists of an immature egg, a number of cells which secrete estrogen, and fluid. Most of these developing follicles degenerate by day 7, leaving only a single dominant follicle to grow, nourishing the developing egg inside it. FSH helps the egg to mature in preparation for its release during ovulation, while the estrogen secreted by the developing follicles helps in the regeneration of the endometrial lining of the uterus. Around day 12, it's a surge of estrogen into the bloodstream. Which reach the hypothalamus, resulting in the increased secretion of GnRH and stimulating the production of luteinizing hormone, or LH, by the pituitary gland. This flooding of LH into the bloodstream causes the follicle to bulge, acting as a trigger for the rupture of the follicle and ovulation around the middle of the cycle. Immediately after its release, the egg is picked up by suction into the fimbriated opening of the outer end of the fallopian tube. From here, it takes about 5 to 6 days to travel through the fallopian tube where fertilization occurs, before the fertilized egg gets lodged in the wall of the uterine cavity. If fertilization of the egg fails to occur within 12 to 24 hours, the egg begins to disintegrate and is eliminated along with the shedding of the endometrial lining. After the follicle ruptures, it is converted into a structure known as the corpus luteum, which secretes the hormone progesterone. Progesterone creates important changes in the endometrial lining of the uterus, making it suitable for it to receive the fertilized egg. The secretion of progesterone is maintained for several days. But if the fertilization does not occur in this period, the corpus luteum withers, resulting in a fall in the levels of progesterone and estrogen and a shredding of the uterine lining, starting the menstrual cycle all over again.